The future of GTA Online that launched with GTA 5, I'm not talking about the online experience of 4, things like that, but the future of this big, sprawling world might be in danger. It might actually be a grim one. Now, again, the keyword here is might, but this comes from essentially Take-Two's CEO addressing the question of what could happen to GTA Online for GTA 5 when GTA 6 launches in kind of the future. Now, I think right off the bat, the first thing to note is the future of any online game is not permanent. There are going to be copies floating around of offline single-player games for as long as the internet exists. Even if they're not legal copies, even if they're just rips, ROMs, whatever, just shared to the internet, like for a game that isn't reproduced ever physically or digitally, say classic Pokemon games like Emerald, etc., that are hundreds of dollars now, those are going to be out there, right? Because they are preserved by people who care about the artistic side of gaming. When it comes down to it, unfortunately, pretty much all online games, unless they get some kind of re-release that removes the online component, they are going to die, and eventually they're not even going to be playable, or it's going to be a lot of hoops jumping through private servers, etc. to play them. Now we're going to take a look at this situation today. I want to preface it with a big might, but I want to tell you why I and a lot of people don't really believe in the preservation of GTA Online when it comes to a game that people have spent millions of dollars on, with essentially the promise or the crossed fingers behind the back promise that it would fund future things. When it launched, the understanding was essentially that it would even be funding more single-player DLC for GTA 5, which we never got and found out later was repurposed for online to make more money. I want to talk today for a few minutes about why people are worried about these things, given the history of the companies around them, from Rockstar to Take-Two to even 2K under Take-Two, which actually the Take-Two CEO was talking about as some kind of proof of concept of game preservation, which I find hilarious considering that my copy of NBA 2K23 already doesn't really work anymore. There's really nothing to that game for the most part, where a lot of the content is gone because they forced people to move up by shutting it down. So we're going to take a look at this today. If you enjoyed the video, you want to leave a like, subscribe, let me know what you think in the comments down below. I do have a question of the day, which is kind of a two-parter here for you. First off, do you believe that this game will be preserved officially? Like, do you think that this will go on in perpetuity for a very long time? At what point do you think it'll die? Secondly, is there a game that essentially did not get game preservation on an official level that you wish did? For me, one of the first ones I always think of is Pokemon Emerald. Couple $100 now for a good working cartridge. Or it's free online through a ROM site. It's like, which one are people gonna pick? Yeah, go figure. So let me know what you think about that in the comments down below. Now here's the thing. Take-Two's CEO was asked about what could happen to this. They asked boss Strauss Zelnick, and this was reported on by Games Radar, which I will leave a link to in the description down below. In that description, there's also links to all kinds of other stuff, from our Discord to our Amazon affiliate link, all the way to our other channels. So check those descriptions if you ever want to see what we're talking about and read it for yourself. But when asked what could happen to this, he actually said essentially that the publisher has shown a willingness to support legacy titles when a community wants to be engaged with them. To which I say, I was still playing NBA 2K23 on and off. I wanted to be engaged with it. I didn't want to buy 24 or 25, but I was forced off of that game because they didn't want people to stay engaged with it. So I find that amusing. Now that said, his full quote was, "I'm going to speak theoretically only because I'm not going to talk about a particular project when an announcement hasn't been made. But generally speaking, we support our properties when the consumers are involved with those titles." And might as well have inserted unless it was a sports game in America here. As an example, we launched NBA 2K Online in China, I think originally in 2012 if I'm not mistaken. And then we launched NBA 2K Online 2 in China in 2017, if I'm not mistaken. We did not sunset Online 1. They both are still in the market, and they serve consumers, and they're alive, and we have this massive audience. So we've shown a willingness to support legacy titles when a community wants to be engaged with them. Now, something I find funny about this is using that as proof of concept that somehow this is going to last. Now, even if we're not taking a look at the sports games, which I will get back to in a second, and the reason I bring that up is because he did. You know, Take-Two, above Rockstar, also is above 2K. 2K Games is making things like the NBA games, WWE, etc. So you get my point there, and we'll talk about that more in a minute. But something I find funny is that even on the Rockstar side of things, taking Take-Two out of the equation and just looking at Rockstar wanting to make their own money, Rockstar does not have an incentive to keep supporting GTA Online indefinitely. Now that could mean keeping the servers up all the way to keeping making new content. And I would understand stopping with new content at some point. To me, that's not part of game preservation, is that I expect you to constantly make new content for your game. Like, the game is 30 years old. Where the hell is that dev team? Like, why aren't they dropping a DLC? Not what I expect. At that point, you know, it's like, if the fans want to make stuff, mods, their own content, etc., let them. But obviously teams are going to move on to make more games. That's just the nature of the business, and I'm sure it's also what developers want. I highly doubt developers want to be stuck on one title for 25 years. That said, GTA Online and 5 have been milked to death by Rockstar. They have now been released across 3 console generations, which I would say I applaud in some ways for game preservation, making it accessible, re-releasing it to new consumers or old fans who maybe don't have access to the older hardware anymore. That's okay. I'm fine with that. But that money was never really reinvested into the game. It was pretty much always pocketed, to my understanding. You look at things like the content that they would release, and yes, I'm sure it did cost some money, but you even have actors like Stephen Ogg and others pretty much outing over the years that there were plans for a lot of that content, or even content that didn't materialize at all, to have been for the single player component. Essentially, that some things were reworked and released for online. You know why? Because online was printing money with shark cards. People were pouring money into online. So the idea was essentially, why would we release a $20 or $30 DLC for single player if we could put this DLC into a live service blender, essentially release this story-driven kind of content for online? People would play that content with their friends, grind it over and over. We wouldn't have to work as hard on cutscenes, things like that, because it doesn't have to be as cinematic, because a lot of it's going to be more focused on your team play. Even if you look at things like the heists, you look at the single player ones and how focused they are on like cinematic type stuff and kind of putting you in that feeling, and even the parallels with Michael and the movie industry and his life. You look at those things in GTA 5's single player, then you look at how those things were incorporated into online. Very different, very stripped down version of that same idea, but the gameplay intact. That's kind of the direction they went, with multiple stars of this game confirming that there was DLC either scrapped or reworked to focus on online, despite what Rockstar doesn't want you to talk about. That is a confirmed fact. So you look at that, and you look at how that content was never really reinvested into the single player world at all. Instead, it was only focused in online. And then you look at how online did release packs and things like that, but they were almost always focused, or I should say updates, they were almost always focused on getting you to grind the game more, in which case it was easiest to do things like use shark cards to buy rewards that would help you with the game, whether it be a better vehicle, better weapons, a nicer home to show off and flex to people in-game, etc. The name of the game was making money in-game, and the easiest way to make that money, honestly, was to pay for it. There are other ways. There are absolutely other ways. There are exploits. There are quick ways to level up and make money, things like that. But the very fastest way was to go over to that in-game store and buy shark cards, something that the single-player economy was not focused on at all, never has been focused on, and hopefully never will be. Now, if we also look at Rockstar and we look at what they've been doing of shifting away from single player releases, at least very often in the last 10 years, I think that itself as a, what would you say, as a pattern, shows where the company's priorities are. Yes, when they release a single player world, it is still a masterpiece typically of a world. You look at something like Red Dead Redemption 2. I am not discounting their ability to make single player games. In fact, if they had fallen off of talent and just were terrible now, like a god-awful studio, and they didn't really know what they were doing, they could kind of make these shell of live service games and that's it, I actually personally wouldn't be so annoyed about the direction the company has gone, because I'd say, well, they lost a lot of their good talent, the company's not the same, you know, these people don't know what they're doing, they're basically trying to make glorified phone games or something. That's what I would think. And that's from someone who likes some live service games. I'm always shouting out my Fortnite code. I'll put it right here. Live service games help me with paying for things I do for this channel like that. I'm okay with them as long as they're preserved. Now that said, I'm also okay with them as long as you don't go on to completely throw out your history as a single player developer, something that in some ways Rockstar has done by admitting that they even canceled titles like Bully 2, really never to return to them. Hopefully someday they do. As of recording this though, nah, that's dead in the water, because at this point, they are the GTA and Red Dead company, because that is what makes the most money. So on the Rockstar side of it, we've already covered a pattern shifting away from single player, really trying to just use single player actually as a deep and important canvas to get people to buy your game, to then play the online component, something that they tried actually with Red Dead Redemption 2. This is not discounting Red Dead Redemption 2's world, but look at Red Dead Redemption 1. What did they do when they wanted to add to the game? Yeah, there would be some fun things here or there, like character packs, some little missions or whatever for their online component that was just there for fun, and they did make some money off of it. But when it came to Red Dead Redemption 1, when they wanted to expand their game in a meaningful way, what did they do? Undead Nightmare. Something very much in depth, adding to that deep world and that lore. But with Red Dead Redemption 2, what did they do when they wanted to expand their game? Well, they launched Red Dead Online for Red Dead Redemption 2. But what did they do as soon as it didn't print money? As soon as Red Dead Redemption 2's online component would require massive reworks, would require a lot of upkeep to add in new content the same way they did to GTA Online, they didn't decide to fix it. With GTA Online, what they did was they launched, it was a rough launch, and they decided to kind of pivot to make it better. But for Red Dead Redemption 2's online component, they decided it was easier to continue focusing development efforts on GTA 6, whatever that online component might be, and continuing to improve GTA Online. Game preservation and upkeep of Red Dead Redemption 2's Red Dead Online component went out the window immediately. That thing was toast. They did not care. That was a game that within the same year of releasing, they stopped caring about upkeeping the online component completely. It is a skeleton of what it could have been, and it didn't even benefit the single player, where it's like they didn't drop it and then go add DLC to the single player like they did with Undead Nightmare for 1. They just moved on. They just said, nah, screw it, whatever. Not worth dealing with. We're doing GTA 6 still. And they just moved on from it. So when I'm looking at the game preservation of their games, that's not a good sign. Also attached to Rockstar themselves, but not technically Rockstar's fault, this is a Take-Two thing from the top, essentially, to bring back the old GTA games. We look at GTA 3, GTA San Andreas, GTA Vice City, GTA 4. When it comes to the previous 3 of those, essentially not 4, but the other 3, they got a release in the GTA Trilogy collection, whatever it was called, the classic trilogy pack, where you could buy a physical or a digital, and you would get copies of these games on modern hardware. But unfortunately, they are different. There aren't all the same songs in them because they didn't want to pay for all the same licensing for music, and also the games launched in a very horrible state, actually being essentially ports of the mobile ports of those games. So, like, it was a disaster. That was their level of preserving their classic GTA experiences from 3, Vice City, San Andreas. They didn't care. Take-Two didn't care. What they cared about was making money. Now, over time, that did get fixed some, and it is in a much better place now because of community outcry and people being pissed. Like, people were not having it, and they were not having the excuses of this huge company that prints more money in a day than you will probably ever see in your entire life as a normal working class person. People understood what happened to those games, that they were basically, I don't know what you want to say, put in a blender, and what came out was not the original experience at all, and not any kind of upgrade or even something on the same quality. It was just frustrating. Frustrating would be like the kindest word for it. So that right there is another example of how much they care about preserving the past of GTA. But then, even with all of that, we move more over to the Take-Two side, and we start looking at other things they're working on, like 2K under them. 2K essentially follows the lead of Take-Two. They have to print money, and sports games are definitely exploited for money, because if you're a sports fan, you are seen as a moron to these companies. I'm not kidding. So you could be a casual sports fan who buys one of these games every handful of years, like me. I get that in a way you're still contributing to the problem. At the end of the day, people should just stop buying these games entirely, and that would fix it. But, every few years, I want a sports game of something. Usually it's basketball, every 4 or 5 years, I'd like a basketball game. But I do the same sometimes with baseball or other stuff. Or you could be someone who's a hardcore purchaser every year. And all that is to them is a spectrum of idiocy. Are you still a moron, but not as big of a moron because you still buy these games every once in a while? Or are you a total ultra mega moron to them because you buy them every year? That's how they view you, because every year, and the cycle seems to be getting quicker with 2K, they will find a way, every year and a half, it used to be 2 years, I believe with 2K23 for NBA, it was a year and a half, they will find a way to kick you off of the game and remove a bunch of the content. And they've actually been finding ways ever since 2019-ish to remove more and more content every time they do it. Now you think about that and you think, well, no, Jay, the online connectivity is gone. So yeah, I can't play online quick matches or, particular matches against friends, and I can't play Ultimate Team or whatever the stand-in is for that in, say, a game. I can't buy my trading cards and play with those trading card players. It gets a lot worse than that when you look into it for sports games. NBA 2K23 is the one I keep going back to because it's the most recent NBA I purchased from this company. Now, there are still things in the game like a quick play, with teams, things like that, on the disc or on the digital copy, and the Jordan Challenge, but the single player campaign, even the story mode of this game, dead. It's gone. Those are online only. If you can't connect to the internet, you can't play it. This did not used to be the case. If you want to see what I'm talking about, I've actually been playing through some classic sports games, things like that, just for fun, over on my Let's Play channel, Degenerate Plays. That's going to be in the description along with those other channels I do. And, a few years ago, we played through NBA 2K16. Recently, we've been playing through some things like classic NHL, different things like that. And you go back to the single player components of these games all the way up to, and I can't speak to every sport, but for the most part, all the way up to 2017 or 18. And even when the online shut down, that didn't mean that component was going away or inaccessible. Now it does. So now you're not only losing the trading card type modes, which do have single player modes built into them, by the way. You're not allowed to keep those cards at all. If you get a Dark Matter Jordan or something like that, you can't just play against the computer with it. They take that away from you. But it's not just that. They don't just take the single player component of multiplayer away. They don't just take the multiplayer away. They also now take a big portion of the single player away. And they're sitting here, Strauss Zelnick is sitting here with his thumbs up in the air saying, hey guys, don't worry about it, telling me that in China, where they've only released essentially 2 of these NBA games in recent years for online experiences, that they've kept those 2 up. Well, no shit, you've kept them up, because you've only released 2 of them. Because the Chinese market is, first off, pickier, second off, has way more national pride. They actually pride themselves on making their own products, something that America and other countries used to have but threw out under the guise of nationalism always being bad. Well, China has that. So China can make its own movies, and they do well in China because Chinese people like their country. They like being Chinese. So they have that. They have a sense of identity, first off. Secondly, China also has standards. There are 1 trillion mobile games in China, And while I am not a huge fan of the mobile or games as a service market being so predatory and being so prevalent, this means that they have a lot of options. So when you are a Western developer coming in there, and there are going to be more rules on you, whether I agree with them or not, to publish your game or publish your movie or whatever, you're probably not going to release as many of those things as in a country where you can pump them out every year and take advantage of people every year. So of course you're going to keep up 50% of your games there when you've only released 2 of them for online experiences. That is not a reassurance. That is not something that to me says, yes, now Take-Two cares about game preservation. Oh, you know what? They've announced shutdowns for their games in the United States, but they care about game preservation. You can't tell me that there aren't people who still wanted to participate in and keep the experiences alive that you shut down. At the very least, single-player components that you essentially ripped the functionality of out of the game that those people bought. You can't tell me there weren't people who cared about that, but then use the guise of, in China, where we haven't released as many online experiences, we've kept them alive. I don't care. That's not a good defense. That's not a good excuse. That's not even the same country that most of the questions are coming from. Not to say that it doesn't matter, like what you do in China, but what you do in China is not going to be your same strategy as what you do in other countries, and you've shown that for years. You've shown that with pivoting developers away from single-player experiences other than to get people into online experiences. You've shown that with Rockstar itself releasing less and less games, while still Take-Two doesn't actually preserve the games that they do have. They don't upkeep those music licenses in a lot of cases. They don't pay to keep that music in the game, which fundamentally alters the experience and the vibes of the game. They don't actually pay to re-release those games in good faith and good states, as shown by the GTA trilogy. They don't care about putting the single-player DLC out there. Instead, it's been reworked to multiplayer DLC for games that will not last forever. Like, you can't tell me with all of this that you are a company that cares about game preservation. I don't believe you. Your history has not shown that. Your history within the last year has not shown that. It's something to me that's incredibly frustrating because I don't get why people would believe this. I don't get why people would take this reassurance as a good thing or as something that matters. And if you're thinking, well, I don't care about GTA Online, why should I care? Which you're probably not if you got to this point in the video, I'm assuming, but if you are, I think preservation of media, as long as it's not something illegal and exploitive that actually isn't art, like something evil, video games, movies, comics, books, things like that, should essentially last as long as our planet does. The whole premise of digitization, the whole premise of now we have hard drives, now we have online cloud storage, now we have the ability to share things with a click, now we have the ability to use, optical drives or discs or all these different things, right? The whole point of all this storage and digitization was that we didn't have to lose things anymore. We didn't have to have Library of Alexandria type level losses of media anymore. Things could be preserved through libraries, whether they be physical in-person libraries or online digital libraries. They could be preserved. So when you as a company are telling me that your game, that with a couple of pulls of plugs or clicks and switches flipped, you could shut down and make unusable to people anymore, is in good hands for its preservation, based off of your company and the companies beneath you, their track record, I don't believe you, and I don't know why anyone should. Let me know what you think in the comments down below. This is something that really frustrates me. It's something that I've noticed that I care about. A lot of customers don't care about, so companies take advantage of it. A lot of these different companies don't care about, etc. It's wildly frustrating to me, but I'm interested to hear your thoughts down there. If you want to check out other channels I do, recently we've been releasing some anime videos over on Magical Jill. I have a podcast style Let's Play channel where we play through games, which is Degenerate Plays. Those are in the description down below. And I have a channel talking about role-playing games, which is also down there, JayRPG. Finally, we do have an Amazon affiliate link we started, which actually goes to help out our channel quite a bit. There are lists, things like there on that if you buy things, we do earn some kind of commission for. I don't know what the percentage is, but anything helps this channel out. A Fortnite code, and finally, we do have our own store, cosmobunny.shop. Now, speaking of preservation, that's actually one of the big goals of this shop, is the preservation of art and paper. And what we do is we take comics, manga, magazines, pamphlets, different inserts, and more that have been damaged, unable to be sold, and we turn them into new transformative resin art for your home through essentially fair use of transforming this into something entirely new through a new medium. So like, for example, a comic book is damaged. We find a couple of pages out of that that are still existing, still can be used. We turn that into a new piece of resin art for your home, coasters, keychains, trays, and more. And then we recycle the rest and make sure that it actually ends up in the recycling instead of just being dumped into a bunch of landfills. So we appreciate you. Hope you checked those things out. Hope you enjoyed the video. Have a fantastic day. And as always, everyone, stay shui.